Before we get started, I would like to invite Veronica Liu, co-founder and general coordinator of our event and community partner, Word Up.
Welcome. Good evening. My name is Veronica Santiago Liu, and I'm one of the founders of Word Up Community Bookshop. We are a bookshop. We are a bookstore and art space in Washington Heights, NYC. We are collectively operated, and we aim to have books, literature, stories, and all of the information, joy, and provocations they hold be accessible to all our community members. We are extremely honored to be hosting Esmeralda Santiago this evening in collaboration with El Museo. On this evening, 6 years to the day that Hurricane Maria made landfall, we reflect and celebrate Esmeralda's newest work, powerful novel, Las Madres. We must let you know that our original interlocutor, Angie Cruz, is unable to be here with us tonight, but in Angie's place, we have another amazing conversation partner, Elisabet Velasquez.
So I'm very honored to introduce to you tonight two amazing authors. First, we have Esmeralda Santiago, is the author of the novela Conquistadora, memoirs, When I Was Puerto Rican and Almost a Woman. Yes, woo! Listen, we're from the Heights. We holler, we cheer, you go for it. Wepa, that's right. Which was adapted into a Peabody Award-winning movie for PBS's Masterpiece Theater. Yes, give their flowers, exactly. Born in San Juan, Puerto Rico, she lives with her husband, documentary filmmaker Frank Cantor, in New York. And after Esmeralda reads an excerpt from her book, we're gonna have a conversation with Elisabet Velasquez moderating. Elisabet is a Boricua writer from Brooklyn. Brooklyn in the house? Yeah. Now living in Jersey City, she is. All right, Jersey. She is a Poets House Fellow, a Dodge Poetry Fellow, and New Jersey Council for the Arts Fellow. Her debut, a young adult novel in verse, When We Make It, received the Kirkus Best YA Fiction Award, YA LSA Best Fiction for Young Adults Award. It went on to be the 2021 Goodreads Reader Choice nominee, a 2022 Gotham Prize finalist, and was named a New York Times Young Adults Books to Watch Out For. Yeah. When she is not writing, she is living the life she hopes to write about. Please welcome Elisabet and Esmeralda Santiago.
Buenas tardes, buenas noches. Thank you so much for being here with us today, celebrating Las Madres, my most recent book. But also, as was earlier mentioned, today is the 6th anniversary of Hurricane Maria. And it is very much in all our hearts and in all our minds, I'm sure, as it is in mine. I am going to read a short part of from the first chapter, and then we're going to have a conversation. And I hope you have lots of questions, ¿verdad? Sí, por lo menos que tengan preguntas, porque a mí me encanta. I love to hear what you ask. I learn a lot from you. And usually it ends up in a book. So I'm stealing from you. I'll be reading from the first chapter called Luz, July 4, 2017. After Luz Peña Fuentes settled in the United States, the accent mark over the N in Peña was left out in English. In Spanish, her full name means light rock fountains, but without the tilde, Pena Fuentes means sorrow fountains, or penalty fountains, or pity fountains, or shame fountains. Crossing an ocean made me sadder, she tells her daughter, Marisol Rios Peña, whose first name in English means sea and sun. I'd rather be rock than sorrow. You are who you believe you are, Mami. Your name and your identity are different things. Sí, eso es verdad. That's a good way to look at it. Luz makes note of Marisol's words in her journal. At a clinic, Luz is annoyed when a nurse calls for Mrs. Pena. Am I, señora, pitiful? No, Mom, far from it. You have a good life and you're loved. Nothing to pity here. Luz doesn't have to add that to the page. At 57 years old, and in spite of some old injuries and age-related creaks and aches, she's physically fit, has satisfying work, and lives comfortably. On weekdays, Marisol walks Luz to Mi Casa Adult Daycare around the corner from their home. There, Luz feeds clients, wheels them from one table to another when they want to play cards or dominoes, keeps them company in the garden behind the building, and 3 times a week leads them in chair-bound exercises. She often interrupts her tasks to add entries in her journal. When the pages are full, she shelves the journal next to those already arranged in her living room, the spines labeled by day, month, and year, so she can later consult what she did when, with whom, and where. She reads her memory books with the same excitement and engagement she does beloved novels, finding new details with each reading. Sketches, drawings, cartoons, tickets from visits to a museum, the theater, the zoo, or the botanical gardens interrupt her looping handwriting. She lingers on the text or on the details that evoke a memory, a curiosity, a revelation. This is my life, she'll tell herself, and just as often, is this my life? The statement does not invalidate the question. After work and dinner, Luz enters her studio, formerly Marisol's childhood bedroom. On the wall, Luz had lettered Peña on a granite slab her friends brought from the abandoned quarry near their house in Maine. Now, Luz prepares the materials for her next art project. Soon after she met Danilo, the man who became her husband, Luz drew his portrait on a stone she picked up in Van Cortlandt Park. He liked it so much, she gave him a self-portrait for their first wedding anniversary. A year later, she painted Marisol's image, and for every birthday after that. Marisol now displays them in her apartment across the hall in their 2-family home. The portraits began as a hobby, but friends and neighbors begged Luz to paint their children or their favorite singers or movie stars. Soon she had commissions from strangers. This week, she's working on a series for a family who sent photographs and stones from their Vermont property. Luz has laid out the stones on her table, has cleaned and prepared their surfaces, but before she turns the lights off in her studio, another one catches her eye. It's green slate, 1 inch thick, 10 inches long by 3.5 inches wide, too big and distinctive for the family group. Its boundaries are like the map of Puerto Rico on her wall, the landmass wider on the left, shaped like a dog's snout, and narrower toward what would be the canine's tail. Inspired, she writes a reminder to create a portrait of the island with its rivers, lakes, and mountain ranges as a Christmas gift for Marisol. She scrolls through stock images of Puerto Rico on her computer and is overcome. It's her last Navidades in Puerto Rico. She's 15, a ballet dancer poised for her cue, the first notes of a sparkling Tchaikovsky suite imminent, her muscles vibrating. She's about to perform solo on a shimmering stage meant to simulate fog, her tutu speckled with rhinestones, her satin point shoes secured by ribbons. She tries to hold on to the moment, but it dissipates as quickly as it appeared. 18 months after that performance, Luz was whisked from San Juan, a 16-year-old healing from physical and emotional trauma, mired in grief and loss, her memories diffused and disjointed. As the plane lifted into the sky toward New York, Luz left behind what happened that fateful summer of fireworks, bicentennial celebrations, and perfect tens in the Olympic Games. Luz has forgotten so much. She's sure she's invented most of her life, so she can say she's Luz Peña Fuentes. On July 4, 2017, she vaguely remembers that dancing girl in Puerto Rico, strong as a rock, who in the United States is sorrowful, penalized, shamed, and pitiful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Museo del Barrio, Word Up Books. I would like to give a shout out to Angie Cruz, who, yes, y'all can clap it up, give her all that good energy. She is currently healing. She's doing well. I was like, what do I tell the audience? Because clearly, I was like, they're gonna walk out and be like, ¿Quién es esta? But she was like, she's recovering. So give her all of your love and all of your energy. And so thank you so much, Esmeralda. I am so honored to be here in your presence and in your presence. Today marks the 6th anniversary of Hurricane Maria. And before we start anything or begin anything, I would like to do a moment of silence for those lives who were lost 6 years ago today. Thank you so much for honoring and remembering those who are no longer with us. And in a lot of ways, this book is about remembering and honoring our histories and our legacies. So I want to get into Maria, because Maria was, to say the least, there are not many words to describe how devastating a hurricane that was to Puerto Rico, where we witnessed a complete failure on behalf of the United States government to render adequate aid to the people, and also the unpreparedness of the Puerto Rican government for this storm. And so that resulted in the loss of thousands of lives. And in your book, Las Madres y las Nenas, your protagonists, they arrive in Puerto Rico just days before landfall of Hurricane Maria. And without saying too much, because I don't want to blow it up, you gotta read the book, okay? You guide us through their life before these moments, during these moments, and immediately in the aftermath of Maria. And so I was reading your acknowledgments, and in your acknowledgments, you mentioned the challenge of writing con sentimientos, And so Angie, who we're calling into the space, Angie had read that you had researched numerous accounts and spoke to numerous people to be able to achieve an accurate portrayal of what Puerto Ricans had been through during that time, because you wanted to sort of become the hurricane to understand the horror. And so this is also a work of fiction that intersects with very real historical events, not just the hurricane, but I'm also thinking here about the birth control experiments in Puerto Rico. And writing about these events means also, in a sense, writing about real people who experienced these events, even though the characters are fictional. Can you discuss the research and the writing process that helped you to strike a balance between authentically portraying the true and historical and significant moments in history while dealing with those sentimientos?
Wow. Yes.
We got right into it.
Yeah, man. She's a professor.
We got 30 minutes.
They go right to it. Yes, I knew that I wanted to write about Hurricane Maria. That was my, and the reason I wanted to write about Hurricane Maria is because I'm a history hound. I love any kind of history, but it occurred to me that the reports, especially during the event itself and the aftermath for several weeks, after a while, you don't hear about what happened in Puerto Rico. But the fact is that Hurricane Maria is still happening in Puerto Rico. And thank you, it's true. and that the people there and those of us who were here worried about the people there are also still living with that. It doesn't go away. But I wasn't really sure what exactly I was going to do with that story. What do I wasn't there. So how do I write about something that affected me so deeply? I have a lot of friends, I have a lot of family there, and of course I love Puerto Rico, and I'm one of the island's, daughters. So it took me a while to figure out what it was that I wanted to say about it. And what it was that I wanted to say was that Hurricane Maria and Hurricane Irma and Hurricane George and all the hurricanes that came before that, and Fiona that came after, that those then become statistics and they become historical events. But what I care about is, how do people live in their history? How do they function in their history? Are they even aware of their history? Some people are burdened by their history. Other people are excited about it, and they want to do something about things that they may not agree with. So my object was to write a novel about the people who were there and who experienced this historical event. Right. But that when you finish this book, you know that this happened to people. It didn't happen to Puerto Rico, because for most people who are not from the island, or who perhaps are not from the Caribbean, it's a very abstract term. It's just a place, Just Ukraine is an abstract place for me, because I'm not Ukrainian. But if I were Ukrainian, it would be a completely different experience when I think about it. So I really wanted to bring that humanity in the midst of this terrible series of events, because it was first Hurricane Irma, then Hurricane Maria, then there were the earthquakes, and then there was Fiona, and then there was Wanda, and then there was Ricky. I mean, it was like, it was like one thing after another, and this has only been 6 years. Can you imagine? I just mentioned like 5 or 6 things that happened in 6 years, all of which are huge historical events in our history. Right. So that was the intention of the book. And then in terms of the process, because I live in the United States, and I was watching this online on the cable channels, checking, all the social media that I could get to find out what was happening. And at a certain point, I realized, oh my God, I know more about what's happening right now in Puerto Rico during this hurricane than the people living there. Mm. And that really scared me, and me da todavía, carne de gallina, because how terrifying it was for them, as terrifying as it was, they didn't know just how bad it was until it was over and they left their homes, they walked around, and they realized the devastation. But those of us who saw it, we could see it. We saw what was happening, and we knew this is much, much bigger than anyone expected or imagined. And so I talked to as many people as I could, family members, taxi drivers, bus drivers, waiters and waitresses. I mean, anybody who would tell me their experience with Maria were people that I was listening to and taking notes sometimes, but much of the time just really taking it in. And that was the beginning of the research. And of course, I read a lot of testimony and self-published books. Many people who don't consider themselves writers, but because of their experience, they had to get it in writing. They had to write this experience so that they could have it somewhere. I think people think you're going to forget these things. You don't ever forget it, but you don't forget it better if you write it down. So I think that a lot of those testimonies, whether it was on blogs or self-published books, was really instrumental in my understanding of what people were experiencing at a time that I was at a distance from it.
You never forget it. But yes, thank you. Yeah, y'all can clap it up. You never forget it, but you never forget it better if you write it down. That's a writer's tip. I hope y'all wrote that down. Mira, se me están cayendo todas las cosas. Okay. So there are, you talked a little bit about the research. There are two intertwining threads in this story. There's Las Madres and there's Las Nenas. Did you always know that you were going to write the story in this way, or how did that come about?
No, it was very kind of organic. The idea, Marisol and Graciela have been two characters that have been in my mind for over 20 years. I mean, I still remember the day that I was driving. I used to have a little cottage in rural Maine, and that's why Maine is a part of this story. And I was driving towards the main road, and I just had a vision of these two women who look exactly like Marisol and Graciela, and I knew that they were connected somehow, you know, and then I just take a note, right? So I remember, this one is very tall and very willowy, and the other one is, smaller and more zefteg, and so those I just described them for myself so that I wouldn't forget. And then, when I start writing, after I do a lot of research, I do the research before I start writing, and so when I began to write, the very first thing that I wrote was a scene in which Luz, Marisol, and Graciela are en el rufo of their house watching the fireworks that you can see. If you get high enough in the Bronx, you can see them all around, right? And so I wrote that scene, which did not make it into the book, by the way.
Yeah, because I was like, espérate.
Espérate, that didn't happen.
Something.
Well, that was the first thing I wrote, and so then I realized, oh my God, these two women who've been kind of haunting me for like 2 decades, they're on the roof with this character I've never met. And so it was, for me, it became the process of asking me a lot of questions. Who are these women? What are they doing on the roof? How do they know each other? The way that they interact with one another in this scene that I sketched out very quickly. It's obvious that they've known each other a long time, and they joke with one another and they banter, all those kinds of things. So I just wanted to know even more. I just kept asking myself, why are they there? And so then the next chapter that I wrote did make it into the book, and that is Graciela's driving from the Bronx to Maine, and it's in that chapter, as I'm sketching it and drafting it, that then all of a sudden Ada and Shirley, and I'm like, who are you? I already had 3 people in here. Where did you come from? And so little by little, they all kind of came together as a group, and I knew that they were related in some ways. And so then the next few months, it was trying to ask a lot of questions of myself, right? But also trying to figure out, how does my story about Hurricane Maria, how does this connect to these 5 women? And it became very, very clear to me that the hurricane is going to be in the middle. I knew that from the beginning. But that is not the only thing that happens to Puerto Ricanos. And so I just didn't want to write a hurricane book. I wanted to write a book about people who experience a hurricane. And so that was the task, Once the research is done, or most of it is done, then it's trying to create people living their lives. And this is what I'm most interested in life, is other people's lives, bien presentada about that stuff.
Bien presentada.
I'm very nosy.
Where's the presentadas in the house? I know, I see ya. Okay. Me too. I'm glad that you said that, and I'm glad that you mentioned Marisol, and I'm glad that you mentioned being presentado and being in, I think you have to be nosy to be a writer, right? You have to kind of want to know people's stories. But so in that vein, in your book, Marisol, who's Luz's daughter, identifies as a New Yorican, right? Living in the Bronx. Shout out to the Bronx, oyala. Okay. But due to her mother's disability, she has a limited knowledge of her own past, right? And one of my favorite parts of this book is how Marisol, who's a nurse, collects the stories of her patients and cherishes them, right? But not just collects them to be nosy, right? Or for any other reason, really, than to have them, right? And she has no intention of ever sharing them with anyone or ever publishing them. And so that made me think about the act of writing, and that made me think about writers. So what would you say to fellow writers in this room about the choice between writing for publication and writing for personal fulfillment?
Well, I think most writers keep journals in which you put all your complaints and laundry lists and your trials and tribulations that you don't imagine are going to be, or you hope in some cases, that will not be published. So there's that very private universe, but you have to inhabit that universe as well, because a lot of information comes from what happens to you. If when Marisol and Graciela showed up in in the middle of driving, I knew that eventually they would be something somewhere in something. I didn't know. But I think for us as writers, we have to take every opportunity to write down, of course, whatever comes to you, because the older you get, the more you forget. So
that's another one. I hope you're taking notes.
So even very bright brain people who are elderly still forget things. So that's one thing. And I think the idea of writing journal for a writer is really important, because you learn a lot about yourself, about your opinions, about what hurts you and what doesn't. Or sometimes, I'll have conversations with people that I didn't dare have with them, because for whatever reason, sometimes, the humiliations that come sometimes that stop you, and you don't have a quick response. And so, but you can put it on your journal, and they don't come off very well, those people. So that's one thing that I think it's important for a journal, for a writer to keep those kinds of information in there, because something might spark. There's always a little seed that might become something else. So that's very different from when I decide I'm going to write a chapter in a novel, because then it's very intentional. I know that I have to create scenes. I have to get from point A to point B, and I have to figure out where is point A and where is point B. And so it's much more organized than the journal. But the journal is a way for you to, for me, writing journal is a way to kickstart the writing. And so I try to write in my journal every single day, because if I don't write at least for 10 minutes a day, I'm not a writer that day. And so that also, it allows you to feel like you've done something as a writer if you write in your journal. There are people who only write journal just because they want to have journals with no intentions of ever publishing them. But I think for us, it's a tool. It's a tool to get us to the next novel, or the next short story, or the next poem. So,
yeah, thank you for that. Shout
there
out
were
to
two
journals.
questions in that, and I forgot what the other point was, and I forgot.
I think you answered them both.
Okay, good.
In that answer, you said, you have conversations in the journal, sort of, with yourself about things that you would never talk about with anybody else, right? And so I'm about to ask one of those questions right now. Let's talk about sex, Esmeralda. That's a question I never thought I would say, so Esmeralda Santiago. But I really wanted to talk about how you navigated the process of addressing sexual assault in the book, and also women reclaiming their own pleasure in the book, and reclaiming ownership of their bodies, considering that these topics can often feel like they're on opposite sides of the spectrum and also overlap. So how did you navigate that conversation in the book, or those topics in the book?
Well, sex, I'm for it. And it doesn't matter what it is, men and women, women and women, men and men, top and the bottom, on the sideways, it doesn't matter, You can do what you do in your private life is your business and not mine. But I do like to have women who claim their sexuality because very, very often, and for many centuries, we were not permitted to even have an orgasm, let alone know what it was. So I think that it's really, for me, as a woman of a certain generation, I was out there, feminist posters, and I didn't burn bras because my mother was a garment worker, so I wouldn't do that to her. But I was burning a lot of other things, calzoncillos, So I think it's a big part of women's lives, and I think there's nothing shameful about it. If it weren't for sex, we wouldn't be sitting here together, right? And it's just like it happened at least once with your parents. So it's not anything to be ashamed of or to be afraid of or to be worried or concerned about, other than are you getting enough if you want it. I like, I'm surprised when people tell me a lot that I write about sex a lot. I do not.
I didn't say a lot.
I just don't, It's
enough, it's enough.
It's enough. I think it's enough. I hope so.
That's amazing. Any Puerto Ricans in the house? Phenomenal. Shout out to us. Shout out to Latinos. Dímelo otra vez. Pa' que tú lo sepas, huepa. Okay, so we are very much aware that Puerto Ricans come in all sorts, we come from all sorts of diverse racial backgrounds, right? And being Puerto Rican itself is not a racial category, right? And one of your main characters, Luz, is a Black Puerto Rican growing up in Puerto Rico. And so in the United States, we're very much aware that Puerto Ricans have a long history experiencing discrimination of all sorts. And Latinos in general, when we're talking about discrimination, we often talk about experiencing discrimination at the hands of Anglo-Americans, right? Or white Americans. And I've heard Latinos say, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this, racism doesn't exist in Puerto Rico, or, right? Okay. Racism doesn't exist in Latin America, right? I'm so glad I'm not alone. And, I've heard Puerto Ricans deny that these things exist, deny things that we know exist in our communities, like colorism, which is born of racism, right? And in Las Madres, you have Luz, who experiences various forms of xenophobia and microaggressions even, which were really loud, right? And if you know, you know, right? And some of them were subtle and some of them were overt, but all originating from fellow Puerto Ricans and from fellow Latinos, which I think is very important to talk about. What meaningful dialogue or message do you wish or aim to initiate through Las Madres regarding the issues of anti-Blackness in our communities?
Oh, wow, that is heavy. Again, I don't set out to, I don't write thematically kinds of things. The themes emerge from the characters. And when she came to me as a almost 6-foot-tall Black ballerina, I was surprised because I was thinking about Marisol and Graciela, who in fact had different names. So I think once she appears as a Black woman, I knew I had to talk about this issue in Puerto Rico among Puerto Riqueños, because it is something that we notice, we are aware of. My father was black, my mother was very fair, and even in Puerto Rico, there were times when people would look at them together and they would give them, the side eye or something, and whatever. Or they would say things to her. I remember my mother, crying because somebody will make a comment about her choice of mate because she's a white woman and he's not. So those kinds of things, again, you save these things. When you're a writer, you know that you're a writer because you collect things. You collect stories, you collect moments, you collect emotions, and then at a certain point you have to write them down. And so before I knew that I would be a writer, I was collecting that information. And when I began writing this book and this character appears, and she's very, very specific in the way she appears to me, I knew I'd have to talk about that. And I have to find ways to talk about it without it being like a professor giving you a lecture, because that's not my intention as a novelist. I want you to take this book to the beach while you're sunbathing. It's not like a job to try and figure this out. So I just really thought about it and did my best to introduce some of these themes. My goal as a writer has always been that my readers should discuss these themes among themselves, among their families, to themselves in their journals, however feels the most comfortable. But I think silence kills. Yep. And so I think if we talk about these things and we speak about them openly, and you don't have to agree with everything or everyone, but I think having a dialogue is absolutely essential. And so I really try to do that, to bring some of these questions and my own preoccupations into the world of the characters that I'm creating, because they can speak for me, all right? But they can also speak for many, many people who don't have the opportunity. And this is, to go to Marisol recording her patients, that's why she does it, is she wants a record. She wants a record of these people that are completely invisible in this city, except to their loved ones or their neighbors or whatever. They are totally invisible. We Puerto Ricanos, we are invisible in the greater society of US Americans. So I try to bring those kinds of preoccupations to the reader to think about and to make an opinion about it and to discuss it and make some, hopefully change will take place.
Thank you. Yes. Y'all are shy. For all the Puerto Ricans, you better clap. Okay. So I just got the signal. I'm so glad we have a timekeeper. Shout out to the timekeeper. They were like, you want us to give you a signal? I said, I'm Puerto Rican. You have to give me a signal. I'll keep talking. So I want to end this portion, because we're going to move on to audience questions. I want to end this portion with a question from Angie Cruz. She says, I was struck by the moments where Luz is trying to regain her memory. She's fighting to stay afloat in some level of consciousness, and she's in and out of these moments. I think of the word slippery. It made me think of how maybe your experience in 2014 may have informed the aspect of the book when you had to reteach yourself English after a stroke. I'm wondering, as someone who's writing a new novel and feeling like I have forgotten how to write one and have been trying to relearn how to write a book, I'm wondering what lessons or wisdom did you gain in the practice of writing from the experience of forgetting or starting again?
Oh my God. La profesora. Wow. There are a lot of lessons from that experience. One is that I'm very lucky because my stroke did not completely, it didn't destroy everything in me. It destroyed a very, 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 very small part of my brain that made it impossible for me to understand the written word. anyone could speak to me and I could understand them. But if I read anything, even I would write a letter to my mother, querida mami, and I had no idea what it said, even if I had just written it. So there was, so it was, it was big because my job is to be a writer, and so that's what I write, and so I couldn't do it. So, but I was lucky that that is all, because there was a certain point in which I realized I have been through this experience of not knowing, looking at a page and not knowing what it means. And that happened when I was 13 years old. And I come from Puerto Rico. I just graduated from 7th grade in Puerto Rico. And so then I look at the books here, and I recognize all the letters. The alphabet is almost exactly the same, except with the accents. But I could not understand what it meant. And so I did what I did then. I did it for my stroke, is I went to the public library. Librarians, thank you. I went to the public library, and I went to the children's illustrated and alphabet books, and that's where I began to learn nouns. And then the librarians, when they saw what I was trying to do, then they kept giving me more and more challenging books until one day I had a chapter book. Yay! So they were very instrumental in my learning English, because when we came, there was no bilingual education. You just basically, they throw you in a classroom and then you just, swim, sink or swim. Yeah. So I felt confident that I would learn how to do it because I had already been through that experience. Wow. And I do feel very fortunate. I didn't have any musculoskeletal issues. I did go through a very short period of amnesia, where I wasn't really sure where I was. Who were these people around me? Why am I here? All these kinds of things that passed very quickly, but it was terrifying, and I never forgot that. And so I used a lot of that experience with Luz's situation, and I also related to both the stroke and my intentions with this book is I really wanted to write a book about memory. And then when Luz appears as this young girl who has this terrible accident and now has these issues, all of a sudden I realize, wow, what is it like for somebody who doesn't have any memory, who has no context for their lives, that every day, like Marisol says, every day she wakes up anew because whatever happened yesterday, she doesn't remember. And so I was so curious about that. My amnesia was very, didn't last very long, but I realized, wow, if you don't have memories, you have no context in your life. And this is why it's so important for us to know our history, to know the history of our lands, the history of our people, the history of our families, because they give us context in our identity. And it helps us with everything else that happens around us.
Wow, thank you. All right, so we're gonna move on to audience questions. I think we have tarjetitas.
Oh, wow, that's very organized.
We sophisticated. And there's also a floating mic if you hear some questions and you come up with a question as you're listening to these questions. Okay. All right. So it says, currently rereading Almost a Woman, in your opinion, what do you miss about being in that stage in life? And what do you feel was your biggest lesson or learning?
I don't ever want to be a teenager ever again. If they did some kind of a time machine, I would not go there. But I think the things that I did learn there, because I was between languages at the time, I was between cultures, I was between environment and climate and history, I learned that I could create myself, that I didn't have to follow the expectations of the eldest of 11 children of a mother who is underemployed and has to resort to welfare and was seen as something less because of that. Because I knew who she was, I knew who the people around me were, and they were not the expectations that I kept hearing outside. From my family, I was the first one to leave Brooklyn for Manhattan. So, it seems like it's not very far, but to go from Bushwick, where I was growing up, to end up in Midtown as a teenage girl, my sexuality is rising, and my school is in the middle of Times Square with all these X everywhere. And so I learned that I don't have to listen to those expectations, that they are not designed for me. They are designed by the people who need a quick way to say who you are.
Do you feel that things have changed for people transitioning to the States from Puerto Rico?
Well, I think the big change that I see, of course, is there's so many more of us now that we can actually recognize one another and we can help one another. And I think many of the Puerto Ricanos who left the island were two main groups, were the professionals whose jobs disappeared overnight, literally, and the people who had children whose schools would be closed for months and months and months, and they had to take care, make sure that their education continued. Because one of the things that in the United States or US Americans don't know about us is we are very high on education. We really believe in education, and we want our children to be well educated. So those are those two big groups that in my research and talking, that's the people that I kept hearing about. But the thing that was amazing, especially post Maria, is how the people, those of us here, how we opened our hearts, our homes, and our wallets for the people who were suffering in La Isla. And that's something that I don't think los puertorriqueños en La Isla were aware of, just how connected we feel to the island until they realize FEMA is not here, the government is not here, pero nosotras estuvimos ahí antes que nadie. And I think that has changed. It has changed the perception of Puerto Ricanos on the island about those of us outside of the island, because until then they didn't really, I don't think they had the same awareness. So yes, I think that has changed. In terms of the other struggles, you know our neighborhoods. Bushwick is now so gentrified, but there are other places where it's nothing but Puerto Ricans living in houses that are really, falling apart and these kinds of things. So those kinds of things have not changed that very much, but I think it is changing, because those of us here are insisting that things have to change, and we're making it happen.
And you talk about that in the book. You talk about the help that we in the diaspora provided, and sort of this exchange between diasporicans and Puerto Ricans on the island. And there's a line in there, and I might be messing this up, so forgive me, but that struck me, that said, when we go to Puerto Rico, we're not meeting strangers, we're meeting cousins.
Right, yeah, no. So, I mean, I actually, I did my DNA. And within, whenever they do the whole thing, it's like, I have 1,500 cousins. And I'm like, that is a percentage of the population, right? And this is only the ones that signed up, right? So.
Yeah. I found some cousins on Instagram. Some folks DM me I think you're my cousin. You on 23andMe? Do we have any cousin in the audience? Any questions from any cousins in the audience? No. Yes. Hold on. Let's get a mic to you. Espérate. Can you stand? Thank you. Not to put pressure on you, but pressure.
Hola, this is so excited. Okay, I wanted to know how you wound up in Maine, first of all, and second, the characters that came to you after your stroke, like what happened, like how did you remember them?
Can you say it one more time? I think it
Okay.
was, how did you end up in Maine?
So
Was the
yeah,
first
how
one?
did you wind up in Maine? I know there's Puerto Ricanos hasta en la luna, but how did you wind up in Maine? And the characters that had come to you, like Graciela and Marisol, after your stroke, that you didn't remember things, how, like, when did they come back?
Okay. So, yes, so for almost 30 years, my husband and I had a house, a little cottage in a fishing village in coastal Maine. He originally went to that place. He's a filmmaker. He was making a documentary film about bad weather fishing, which happens a lot in Maine. And so he went to that place, and then when we met and we were dating and he wanted to share some of his life with me, he brought me to this place, and I fell in love with the place as well as he did. And so for many years, we rented a place until we were able to, we could afford to buy a little place. And so all my other books have been written in that house, except for Las Madres. So when Graciela appears to me in the, driving, which I do a lot because I live in the suburbs, it was very clear that that was where she was going, was Maine, because I've made that trip so many times. It's about 7.5 to 8 hours from where we live. And so I knew every curve of the highway. I mean, I had my particular spots that I would stop to go to the bathroom, to get a meal, or to just walk around. So that's why the Maine itself became a character for me. And then I had to figure out, well, what are Puerto Ricans doing in Maine? So then that's how this fisherman comes up, because there was a very lively movement between the big ports on the Northeast particularly, and Puerto Rico, because the sugar has to get out of there, right? The molasses for all the liquor that was being made and consumed in the United States. So there was a lot of people knew. It's surprising, in this village of fishermen, they knew where Puerto Rico was because their grandfathers or fathers or uncles had been there delivering things and picking up things from the ports there. And so this is how Winslow appears, as somebody who falls in love with a Puerto Riqueña, which of course he would. And so... Obvio, la ve ahí, dice, okay, that's it. She's definitely different. And so that's how this is how, it's organic. When I talk about organic, it sounds weird, but it's like, these ideas come, and if you respect your process as a writer, and those of you who are writers, this is one of the hardest things to come to, is what is your process, and how can you protect it, your process, as opposed to the way Isabel Allende does it or anybody else does it, and also to insist from the people around you that this is your process and they have to respect it. So all those kinds of things are a process of maturing, and was a process for me of maturing was that I have to be very clear with my family and with my friends about my process, which is a very lonely existence to everybody else, but not to me. I really do become a hermit. I would go to Maine for 3 or 4 months so that I could write by myself. And that community were very good to me. The ladies knew I was a writer. They knew I was there writing. And so very often, one of the fishermen would leave a bag full of shrimp on the door. And then they'd call me and they'll say, oh, Esmeralda, we left you some shrimp. Or a lady said, we had a family here and we have an extra apple pie. Thank you. And so then they would, so they treated me very, very well, against what one would expect from a very conservative, fundamentalist Christian community of fishermen and their wives and children. But somehow, I have a lot of affection for that place and those people. And then the characters, when they come, I just believe them. If these two young women who showed up in my car 20 years ago, and I immediately took notes of who they were. I have never forgotten. I didn't know what I was going to do with her. I didn't know what they were doing in my car, and why were they bickering? All these things become part of my process, which is of ask a lot of questions. I was the most annoying little girl for my mom and my dad because I was the why kid. I was not, a lot of kids are the what kid. I was the why. And so you can go why for 2,000 times, as a kid. And I was that kid. Well, I'm that kind of writer. I'm the why. I'm constantly asking, why this? Why is this woman standing in the rain? Does she have an umbrella? Why doesn't she have an umbrella? It's raining. Those kinds of things are part of trying to figure out who these people are for me, and then to really respect that process and allow it to happen, because if you don't respect it, they stop talking to you. They do. Believe
Wow.
me.
Respect the process.
Respect the process.
And demand other people respect it too.
I think this is one of the hardest things, I think, for writers, especially when you're beginning in your career. As a writer, you hide to write. You'll do it like before the kids get up, or when my husband's in work, or when I'll go to the library and I'll go into a little corner where nobody sees me. There's no shame in being a writer, but I think if you want to stay in your home and you are a writer and you need silence, then you better turn off the freaking stereo, and your kids have to, now that they all have their little things, you don't have to do that anymore, but I'm pre that time. And so those kinds of things, and you tell your friends, I love you, but I'm not going to go to lunch for the next month because I'm writing and I really need all my energy and focus on this. And the people who are really your friends understand that, accept it, and respect it. Yep. And you have to insist on it. And that's sad but true.
Awesome. How many more questions do we have time for? One more?
I have one.
One more? Okay, so just one more question. I see a hand.
Hi.
Oh, over here, okay. Hi.
Hi. Hello. So I have a comment and a question. And the comment, un poco, lo voy a decir en español porque el idioma que estoy pensando esto y tengo la memoria bien fresca del huracán María también y es un día bien emotional. Así que un poco el comentario era sobre la memoria y el recuerdo, porque yo siento que en Puerto Rico, después del huracán María y todos los años que han pasado, hemos tratado incluso de olvidarnos un poco de lo que pasó, de no tener en la cara todo el tiempo la crisis y el efecto de la crisis y todas las repercusiones y todo el aftermath, ¿verdad? De todas las crisis que han pasado. Y se hace bien difícil olvidarse cuando incluso todavía tenemos a Luma apagándonos la luz, cobrando 3, 4, 5 veces el precio de electricidad de un servicio esencial que no funciona. Y es inevitable transportarse al 2017. Y eso está brutal. Así que un poco pues me aprecia mucho que haya jugado con la memoria y el recuerdo, porque incluso los puertorriqueños tratamos también un poco de olvidarnos a propósito. Y se hace bien difícil un poco tener ese respiro y ese alivio, porque lo tenemos en la cara todo el tiempo.
Sí.
Ya, ese era el comentario.
Gracias. Yo soy de esas personas que yo no quiero olvidar nada. Y las cosas feas y las cosas lindas. Y yo creo, en una situación como esta, I'm speaking Spanish, am I right?
Sorry, it can be in English.
Okay.
That was a very loose moment.
I know, it's just like a very loose moment. So I'm the kind of person who doesn't want to forget anything, bad things, good things, happy things, sad things. I really think for us to be human is to hold on to our memories, because as far as we know, every other animal on this planet doesn't have that, right? So that's a gift to us, for us to be able to remember everything that, as much as we can manage, right? And to value it, even though it's not really good. No, I don't want to be a teenager again, but yes, there are lessons that I learned there at that time that I used for the rest of my time. Luz, for me, represents a very particular situation in Puerto Rico, which is that we know our history. We have read it. Maybe we learned it in school. Those of us living here, we're constantly checking the newspapers, and we go to Univision and Telemundo and all that stuff. We want to stay on top because we want to know what's happening. But many people would rather forget. People want to forget Maria, especially the people who are supposed to do something about it. They want to forget. And so, the government agencies would rather that we would stop talking about it, because then they would have no responsibility for the things that need to be done. Yeah. And so this is what the danger in forgetfulness and forgetting things is, that then you're giving the power to other people who don't forget. So that's one thing. And I think for Luz also, to me, represents Puerto Rico in that sense, that we know our history, but we forget it. And then we keep doing the same stupid thing over and over again. And we don't, I think one of the things that surprises me, and I know los Puertorriqueños, you can argue with me, I don't care. But I just think there's no respect in the history. We don't respect it enough to do something about the things that are wrong, that have happened in our history, that should change, right? And so that's the danger. And it is dangerous to deliberately forget. Yes, I know we have all had terrible traumas. Luz has more than most of us, I have had more humiliations that you can't humiliate me anymore. But we cannot just say, I don't want to remember that anymore. Because what happens, it's like it just festers. And then you don't learn from the lesson. You don't learn from the lesson of history. I don't know if I answered your question, but I was going there. Empecé en español y se me pasó.
No, I really, hello? I might have turned this off. Hello? Yes? ¿Se escucha? Okay. Thank you so much for that. So my question, un poco en seguimiento, in following that, was one of the things that I remember most after Hurricane Maria was, especially from the press, local and from U.S. press, was kind of like un sobreuso y un abuso de la palabra resiliencia.
El abuso.
Yeah.
Sí, el abuso. Abuso en varios niveles.
Yeah.
En el nivel familiar, abuso, gubernamental, abuso, y el gobierno aquí, abuso. Eso es absolutamente correcto. Yeah. Pero el abuso, los que pueden hacer algo acerca de parar el abuso, tienen que hacerlo, okay? In the case of abuse, any kind of abuse, as a human being, we have an obligation to stop that against other people. That is our obligation as human beings, el abuso, right? How do you deal with that? It's a whole other maraña of things, because you're dealing with traumatic experiences, like the kinds of things that happened to Luz, abusos again by her peers, abusos by the culture, right? Because she's black and she's a ballerina, and they say, well, there's something off with that, right? And that is not as specific for her as the abuso that she gets later. So we have to be aware of it. We have to try to do something about it when we can, but at the very least we can speak up that it's happening. Because as long as you, lo escondes, nothing will change, and it'll just continue, and people will continue suffering. You know, in the case of what happening in Maria, this book, my object was that people don't forget what happened. You know, I didn't write this because I wrote it because I did not want to forget. And I didn't want you to forget. And I don't want somebody in Kansas who has never heard of Puerto Rico and maybe stumbles across this book and learns about what happened and knows that there are people who were affected by this event. They should not forget that. And the only way that we can have change is if we don't put everything under the rug or we pretend to forget things. Luz had to do it, you know, but Marisol doesn't do it. This is why she's collecting stories. These stories are helping her in her own identity forming and shaping that she's doing. And in Puerto Rico, desafortunadamente, we forget. We deliberately forget. We forget the things we forget the things that we believed 15 years ago, you know, because we deliberately, and I'm talking now politically. I'm not talking about trauma, because trauma is different.
I was just going to say, because a lot of the forgetting, you know, when you go through a trauma, some of that forgetting is to protect yourself.
Right, yes.
Right?
And we should, but I think when it starts emerging, I think the worst thing you can do is hide it again.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because obviously it's still there. It's bubbling. It's burbling.
They're giving me the time, and this is like such a good conversation. You know? I want to end on the topic of remembering. And so we talk about forgetting, and I call it, for myself, I call it an inherited forgetting. I've inherited the process of forgetting, and so I have to remember, and that's why I'm grateful for writers like you, and I'm grateful for books like Las Madres. And so I want to know what you would offer to individuals who were born in the diaspora, any diaspora, not just the Puerto Rican diaspora, who might be grappling with not having comprehensive knowledge about their heritage and their origins.
Google.
Ja.
For God's sake.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
I mean, really, you know, if you have lost touch with your culture of origin, whatever that may be, it's not hard to look it up, really. Go to the library, go online, learn about it. I know a lot of Puerto Ricans who don't speak Spanish, and they feel badly about that. I'm going, if you know the history and you feel like you're Puerto Rican, y tú bailas la salsa and you eat the arroz con gandules and the piononos and all that stuff, nobody can take that away from you. It's none of their business. But it's up to you to educate yourself. That is your job. It's nobody's fault if you don't do that. So do it.
Thank you so much, Esmeralda. And thank y'all.